This video is to help you with the Criterion A summative that talks about Earth spheres and kinetic energy as well as heat flow or thermal energy transfer. So the four Earth spheres are, there are four Earth spheres. The first one is the atmosphere, the biosphere, the geosphere, and the hydrosphere. Some examples of the atmosphere would be the particles that are in the air, like oxygen, nitrogen, the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and water vapor and methane. Examples of biosphere would be humans, animals, insects, trees, everything that has life. And then the geosphere would be things that are on the ground, soil, sand, rock, the mountains, cliffs, the seafloor, that's part of the geosphere. And then hydrosphere would be anything that has water in it. So oceans, lakes, even the clouds would be part of the hydrosphere, as well as part of the atmosphere. All right, so let's talk about kinetic energy. So we'll start with particles, and we know that particles are always moving, and moving particles have kinetic energy. Now, if you add heat to the particles start moving faster, and their kinetic energy goes up, their temperature becomes hotter, and the particles move farther apart. Now, if you take away the heat from the particles start moving slower, their kinetic energy decreases, their temperature becomes cooler, and the particles come closer together. All right, let's see, there are three states of matter. We have solid, liquid, and gas, and let's talk about the kinetic energy of solid, liquid, and gas. Solids have a low kinetic energy because their particles are basically stuck together, but they're still vibrating. Liquids, the particles are still stuck together, but they're more fluid, but their kinetic energy is higher than solids. And then gas, their particles are bouncing all over the place. There's a lot of space between the particles. Their kinetic energy is a lot higher, and their particles are farther apart. The instrument that we use to measure temperature is the thermometer. All right, now let's talk about heat flow. Heat flows from hot to cool all the time. There are three different ways heat flows, or we also call them thermal energy transfer. That is radiation, conduction, and convection. So radiation is energy that flows through space. So energy that flows through space and then touches another object, that's heat transfer is radiation. An example of that is like when you're in a campfire and you are not touching the fire, but you still feel its heat, right? So the heat from the campfire is radiating through space so that you can feel it. Another thing is conduction, and conduction is the heat flow between two different objects touching together. So an example of that is that when you are touching a cup of hot cocoa, the liquid has a lot of energy in it, and it's touching the mug, heating up the mug, and you are touching the heated mug. And so the heated mug is now flowing, the energy from the heated mug is flowing onto your cooler skin. So you're all touching, and so that's conduction. And then the third thermal energy transfer is convection. Convection has something to do with the same particles. So let's talk about air particles, right? If you are heating up air particles, so the heated air particles are rising, and once they go away from the heat source, they start sinking. And if they sink, they go back to the heat source, and then they rise, and then they cool down again, and then they sink. And that's called convection. Okay. And that is your Criterion A summative.